That angry mob screaming trans rights are human rights were chasing down a student speaker who was invited to speak on campus on behalf of Turning Point USA. The target, a frequent guest on this program, Riley Gaines, the athlete, NCAA champion swimmer who tied Leah Thomas in a championship race last year. And of course, the trophy was given to Leah Thomas because, well, Leah Thomas is a man, and that made a political statement that was important. The bigger issue here beyond the trans activism is the rights of students, individuals, anybody to utilize their First Amendment rights on a college campus. It's getting harder and harder. Joining us right now to discuss that is the Executive Director of Speech First, Cherise Trump. No relation, we always have to say that. Cherise, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That was a harrowing scene, and it actually got violent at one point. She was trapped inside a classroom. They wouldn't let her out for hours. Is this a one-off, or has this sort of been the thing that we've seen growing and growing on college campuses of late?
This is the new trend that we are seeing on campuses, and as you saw with the Riley Gaines incident, it is certainly escalating. It is becoming more violent, more hostile. I believe before they chased her out of the room, the lights went out, and they actually physically assaulted her in that process. I don't know if the university had proper preparations for this, but I recently just spoke at SUNY Oswego, and they had a bunch of security there because there were a lot of protesters protesting me for wanting to talk about free speech itself. And these protesters were trying to tell me that free speech is hate speech. So there's a completely different view and reality that these protesters are operating within when it comes to how they view speakers and people who disagree with them.
Cherise, here's the real disconcerting thing, and the thing that I want to talk to you about, because I know that you've been writing about this and trying to fix this problem, and that is the grown-ups in the room. The deans of these schools. There's a disturbing trend here where we had the dean at San Francisco State University put out a letter congratulating the mob on their behavior, and they not even mentioning Riley Gaines once. The faculty at these colleges are constantly siding with the authoritarians who want to shut people down.
Yes, and I believe the leadership at San Francisco University also put an apology out, but not to Riley Gaines. The apology went out to the students on campus who were harmed by whatever she had to say. And as you mentioned, this is also a trend you're seeing at UC Davis when Charlie Kirk came to speak there. One of the deans actually put a statement out in advance with a completely false narrative, with information that said that Charlie Kirk had said stuff against trans people that he actually did not say. And you saw recently in Pittsburgh where you had a state representative pressuring the University of Pittsburgh to cancel Michael Knowles because of what he was going to come and say. So there are a lot of leaders involved with setting the example, setting these bars for how students are allowed to behave during these events.
We also saw that scene at Stanford Law School where a visiting federal judge, a Trump appointee, was asked to speak. He was screamed down, shouted down. They brought in the dean of inclusivity and equity. Why they even need a dean like that, I don't know. And again, she reprimanded the judge as if he had caused this problem. Although eventually Stanford, they issued a statement that, is there a glimmer of hope in this? I was trying to find something for my future children.
So yes, Dean Martinez, who's the dean of Stanford Law School, issued a statement. It was a long, lengthy, it was a 10-page statement about the freedom of speech in America and how this is important to, campus environment and all of the promises that they are going to make going forward, making sure students understand the fundamentals of the First Amendment in this country. That is something that we are all very excited about. We are all laudable, when it comes to these types of statements. However, they do not deter future behavior. If you just make a promise that we'll defend free speech next time, that's not going to stop deans and leadership and administrators from stepping in. That's not going to stop students from behaving this way. What will stop them in their tracks is when you actually show there are tangible consequences and that Dean Steinbach, for example, will be held accountable for actions by being fired.
Yeah, and I got to think also, cynically speaking, that the dean of the Stanford Law School did this out of response to a couple of federal judges who said, we're not going to even entertain any graduates from Stanford Law for clerkships or anything like that. They're going to start feeling tangible results. But that's what has to happen, right? They need to feel the pain.
Right, they absolutely need to feel the pain. I feel bad for the students at Stanford Law and at Yale Law School as well, who are basically going to be missing out on fundamental clerkships for their career paths because the university administrators are allowing students to behave this way and actually encouraging them to do it. You know, with Dean Steinbach at Stanford, she wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post soon after the event occurred and actually defended her actions. She said that everything that she was, saying she was going to stand by it and she wasn't going to walk it back. And the New York Times just interviewed her and she said, well, maybe I didn't handle it properly. But really, this is just an issue of her getting caught in the act. Because in that interview, she says she wasn't prepared for her statement to actually be making the rounds around like press and media. And when you start to look at how she reacted now that everyone's covering it,
yeah,
all of a sudden she's going to walk it back and say maybe it wasn't the right way. She prepared these comments. This is a 6-minute speech she prepared in advance to come in and interrupt this event and talk down and reprimand Judge Duncan for actually just being a conservative judge.
Yep. And Stanford, by the way, one of the hardest schools to get into, one of the most expensive schools in America. They bragged recently that they're not even looking at SAT scores anymore for their prospective students. So there you go. Good on you, Stanford. Real fast, what happened at Cornell University? I understand students voted to require trigger warnings for traumatic classroom lessons. Are the lunatics literally running the asylum right now, Cherise?
Yes, it is sad because you start to look around and you're like, wait a second, are these things actually being taken seriously on campus?
Yeah.
Could this possibly be a thing that's happening? And the sad reality is that they are. When I was at SUNY campus, they basically told me that every single professor is required to ask students about their pronouns. This is an upfront requirement, and it's all being accepted and it's all being enforced. The trigger warning stuff has been happening for years, and it's just getting worse. I think it was Brandeis University that said that you couldn't even use the word trigger anymore when talking about trigger warnings because the word trigger was triggering.
But they're the ones who came up with trigger warnings in the first place, for crying out loud. Yeah. Oh, but it's a part of a gun. I get it. Real fast, I know over at Speech First, you guys have been working on this, and you now have a thing called the Freedom from Indoctrination Act. What is this?
Yes, part of the reason these students are so hypersensitive to everything that they're hearing is because the universities, the second students step on campus and come and get their freshman orientation, universities are telling them that they should be offended, that they should be walking on eggshells, that there's reporting systems in place where they can report anything that offends them or bothers them or upsets them, that joke bad, stereotyping's bad, microaggressions are bad. Who even knows what a microaggression really is? And so universities are telling students to be hypersensitive. And so we are actually, we put a model policy out there for states to really take charge and say, you know what? Actually, freshman orientation should be about what's going on, like what the rules and regulations are formally at the school, what the federal standards are and what the state standards are, but also maybe about actual education and maybe about talking, what's free speech and viewpoint diversity. Are those important concepts to hold close and dear when it comes to your interactions on campus? And so the model policy shows curriculum and creates a path where states can create curriculum requirements for freshman orientations, but also stops these mandated DEI trainings that students are required to go through.
Excellent. Thank you, Cherise Trump. I appreciate that. By the way, earlier I said something about my future children. I already have children. I meant the future for my children. I don't want my mother-in-law to get excited about it. No future children. Not happening. More to come on O'Connor tonight.